opinion and expression. So, you know, this is arguably the most important of the values, because, you know, if you're not allowed to speak freely, how do you know when someone's telling the truth and what they're really trying to express, right? So let's say, for example, you know, because I find this subject fascinating, like, let's say the government puts out a law tomorrow and says racism is a criminal offense, you're not allowed to say anything racist, you'll be sent to jail. Okay? Okay. Now, does that mean that tomorrow there's no more racist people?
No, well, there's not.
No, right? Now, on a personable basis, if people aren't free to speak, like, how would you know anything about them if they're not allowed to speak freely, right? And there is a caveat, right? Like, there's hate speech, and some people would argue there's no such thing as hate speech, right?
Hate speech.
What's hate speech?
Like
just
I don't like you, and you're telling a bunch of
that, but like 10 times more vulgar, let's say.
You're
You're a racial slur, whatever terrible word, add in, right? You know, like saying something like, I think such and such group of people should die, should have this horrible thing happen to them, right? Like, that's hate speech. Which, grade 9, is slightly different than saying, like, let's say you go online and you give threats to a person. Man, no, I'm not right in front of the camera, come on.
You have some editing to do, Mr. Hodges.
No, we don't edit on this channel. Okay. Hate speech is not the same as inciting people to violence. Do you understand what this word means? Incite. Okay. To incite, to incite people to violence is basically like asking them, calling them to do violent things. So like some person with a big following on Twitter says, everyone take to the streets and go attack blue people.
Blue people.
Right?
Blue people.
What's wrong with Smurfs?
Well, they're
So many things. First of all, like what are they doing being so kickable? They're just right down there, you know?
Yeah.
You can't incite people
Field goal.
to violence. Okay? Back there, you had your hand up, waiting patiently. Just make sure we're listening.
So there's a bill at the moment going through House of Representatives. I forget the number, but it's banning symbols of hate. So like a Nazi flag,
A swastika.
or a KKK hood or outfit, and something that is being brought up is, well, if we ban that, could it be infringing on the freedom of expression? Because, well, what if somebody is wearing a white hood and a robe, and
Someone
they
might
have-
consider this
yeah,
scarf an expression of hate.
I know. But what if someone is wearing a
Particularly given what's going on in the world right now.
white robe and hood,
Yeah.
and they have a magical, like, wizard clan in their business? So, like,
The irony being, I'm pretty sure one of the high-ranking people in the KKK organization, they call them Grand Wizards.
Yeah.
So hold on. Before I, hey, let's focus up over here, please. So I'll take your question in a moment, but before we do, it's important to consider, you know, if the government starts saying, or like who's allowed to say what's a hate symbol? Who's allowed to say what is and isn't acceptable, right? And if you give that authority, let's say, to a government figure or an entity, you know, what happens when wearing a bucket hat becomes an expression of hate? Right? What happens when wearing a baseball cap is an expression of, you know, let's say nationalism, right? You know, or like, you know, oh, you can't wear like a baggy hoodie and have your hood up because, you know, that's a symbol of whatever, right? Like, I don't know, school shooters, right? Like, not profiling or anything, but so that's a really good point that you brought up, because right now it might start as the obvious ones. Well, you can't you know, have a KKK symbol. Does everyone know what the KKK is?
Yes.
Yeah. The Ku Klux Klan is.
I did not know that.
Really? Listen, that's ironic. I'll just say that. If there's one person, if there's one person in the room who should know what the KKK is, I feel like it's you. But the Ku Klux Klan is grade 9s. It's basically a hate group.
Oh, geez.
Just unveil a photo of like some kid, you know. So both those gentlemen there, the man on the left is Martin Luther King Jr., the man on the right is Malcolm X. Both of them dealt with this form of, let's call it white nationalism. So the Ku Klux Klan was a group of people, they were really against minorities, particularly black people at the time in American history. You know, they would literally lynch people. Do you know what that is?
Literally what?
Lynching is when a mob of people, like they would lynch black people. So like a mob of people would attack a black person and they would kill them. They would hang them off a tree, right?
Was there burn them at the stake?
I don't know if they burned
They
them.
burned crosses, did you know that?
Yeah, so Martin Luther King Jr., do we know who that is?
Yeah.
Okay, civil rights activist in the 60s. I had a dream, exactly his most famous speech. I have a dream, right? That's the words. In many instances during his civil rights protests, you know, members of the KKK would put a cross on his lawn and set it on fire or across the street. So you know, if a government starts banning, let's say, a symbol of expression, even if it is one that's hateful, one that we know better, you know, how does that line start to shift? You know, at what point do, you know, common everyday symbols then maybe become problematic, right? So again, like if you know, for some people, let's say like 9/11 really struck you and your family, so you think any expression of the Islamic faith is a hate symbol. And should you then promote that idea in the government? Well, if we're banning Nazis and we're banning, you know, KKK symbols, why can't we ban Islamic symbols? There was an attack on American soil, right? So this problem can get very complicated. Did you want to say something, or were you? You had your hand up earlier.
I was gonna ask what KKK is, but now
Yeah.
No,
Little
listen.
mini lesson on.
No, but listen, guys, I wasn't born here. In Jamaica, there's no racism. I don't care about what y'all do, so I didn't know what KKK was.
Fair enough, right? So that's a good point. Like in Jamaica, is there a lot of other ethnic groups other than
No, there's
Jamaicans?
just like Chinese and that's all. Yeah, basically black TD.
Okay, right? Whereas some people have a real big problem with, like, you know, when you look across this classroom, you see a diverse group of people, right? And some people have a real big problem with that. And people have had a problem with that for centuries.
Oh, come on.
What did you just say? That's messed up, don't say that.
What?
What did she say?
I said white is not right.
Hey, listen. It's racist regardless of who you say it to or who you say it about. Okay. Freedom of the press and other media
Wait, is not
communication. I'll point to another poster. How many of you know about Tiananmen Square?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Tank Men. How many of you know about this? Anyone? Can you see this?
Then they fired on civilians.
I can't see the exercise.
Yeah, it's just red.
Yeah. It's red
Yes.
for the blood and for the communists, okay?
Or for the exit sign.
Yeah, or for this.
So in China, in what year does it say up there again? So in 1960s, the communists take over China. There's hell for the next 10 years. And by 1980s, 1990s, a lot of people were fed up with this extreme government control. Part of the Tiananmen Square revolt, not really, I mean, part of the Tiananmen Square incident, what caused it was that people in China wanted more freedom of the press. right? So they didn't want government-funded media. They didn't want the government saying you can't have independent journalists expressing opinions, right? They didn't want that. They wanted more freedom of ideas and expression in their press, which, you know, for most of us, well, maybe that'll become a problem in the next 5-10 years. We'll see how it goes with, what is the bill again? Do you remember Bill C?
I cannot.
Yeah. I don't know if it's Bill C-11, but our government is basically promoting a bill through that makes it more complicated to get news, right? They basically, I'm pretty sure, I'm like 90% sure they want journalists to be in a registry with the government,
So,
which is real sketchy. Kids aren't old enough to really understand that.
so Bill C-11, it's already passed and everything.
Yeah.
That was just to do with like promoting Canadian content on TikTok and everything. But I don't know if this new bill is. I forget the like title, but it is pretty sketchy.
Yeah. I remember a year or two ago, a lot of journalists that I was following were saying like, you know, why should the government be able to decide who is and isn't a journalist, right? And you know, if someone is critical of the government, you know, do they lose their status as a journalist and then get called fake news, perhaps, right? So who's allowed to report on that? Freedom of peaceful assembly, the freedom for groups of people to assemble for the purposes of meetings, protests, and other public and private gatherings, which is actually a